The humidity of Hong Kong is not merely weather. It is a physical weight, a damp shroud that clings to skin and carries the scent of salt, diesel, and ancient incense. It is a city of vertical ambitions, where skyscrapers claw at the clouds and the ghosts of the British Empire linger in the shadows of the neon-lit alleyways. On the highest point of the island, Victoria Peak, the mansions are hidden behind walls of dense tropical foliage, guarding the legacies of men who built empires out of the chaos of the South China Sea. Among these fortresses of wealth sat the Lee Mansion, a sprawling estate that had remained silent since the passing of the great Tycoon, Sir Edward Lee. But today, the silence was shattered by the arrival of a woman the family had tried to erase from its history books. Mei Ling, the estranged daughter, stood at the iron gates, her eyes fixed on a house that had once been her prison and was now her crime scene. Mei Ling had spent 20 years in a self-imposed exile in London, carving out a life far from the suffocating influence of her father's shipping dynasty. She had been the rebellious one, the daughter who dared to question where the family's initial seed money had come from during the turbulent years leading up to the 1997 handover. Her father had officially disinherited her, stripping her of her name and her claim to a fortune estimated to be in the billions. But when Sir Edward died, he left behind more than just a void in the boardrooms. He left a trail of breadcrumbs that only his most hated child could follow. In her hand, Mei Ling clutched a leather-bound diary she had received from an anonymous source, a diary that spoke of a denied fortune, a massive reserve of wealth that had been legally severed from the main estate to avoid the prying eyes of the new administration in 1997. The history of Hong Kong is a history of transition, a delicate dance between colonial past and the sovereign future. In the years before the Union Jack was lowered for the last time, the great families of the city were faced with a choice: move their wealth to the west or find a way to hide it in plain sight. Sir Edward Lee had done both, but the diary suggested that he had also made a third choice, a secret pact with the Hyung family, a name that whispered of triad connections and shadow banking. The fortune wasn't just money. It was a truth of how the Lee dynasty had survived the transition by selling out their competitors to the highest bidders on both sides of the border. This was the financial topic that Mei Ling was here to expose, a revelation that would not only reclaim her inheritance, but would ignite a firestorm in the heart of Central. If you are captivated by the intersection of high society scandals and the dark undercurrents of international history, make sure you are subscribed to Novel Chronicles. We are beginning an epic 100,000 character journey into the heart of Hong Kong's most dangerous secret. A story of blood, gold, and the daughter who refused to be silent. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single block of this unfolding masterpiece. The resolution of the Lee legacy starts now. Mei Ling walked past the gatehouse, the security guards hesitating to stop her. There was something in her stride, a familiarity that the years of exile hadn't erased. She entered the great hall of the mansion, where the air was cold and smelled of expensive floor wax and stale air. Hanging on the central wall was a portrait of her father, his eyes as hard as the diamonds he used to trade. Beside him stood her brother, Victor, the man who had inherited the throne and the one who had spearheaded the legal campaign to keep Mei Ling out of the country. Victor was already there, standing by the fireplace, a glass of vintage scotch in his hand, and a look of pure, concentrated venom on his face. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here, Mei Ling," Victor said, his voice a low, cultured rasp. The lawyers were very clear. "You are a guest in this city, but you are a stranger to this house. Whatever truth you think you brought with you from London, I can assure you it has already been buried under 10 layers of corporate litigation." Mei Ling didn't flinch. She walked to the center of the room, her heels clicking on the imported marble. "You always were a better accountant than a brother, Victor," she replied. "You spent the last 6 months counting the money in the public accounts, but you haven't looked at the old harbor ledger. The one father kept in the safe room beneath the Aberdeen docks. The one that proves a 1997 gift was actually a bribe paid to the syndicate to allow our ships to bypass the blockade. The fortune isn't in the banks, Victor. It's in the infrastructure of the city itself." The suspense in the room was palpable, a suffocating tension that seemed to dim the lights of the crystal chandeliers. Victor's hand tightened around his glass. He knew the ledger she was talking about, or rather, he knew the legend of it. It was the exclusivity of the Lee family's power, a secret that had been passed down from the opium traders of the 19th century to the shipping magnates of the 20th. If Mei Ling had proof of a denied fortune tied to triad activity and colonial corruption, the Lee Empire wouldn't just be sued, it would be dismantled by the state. The connection between the past colonial sins and the present's corporate greed was a bridge that Mei Ling was ready to burn. She opened the diary to a page dated June 30th, 1997, the night of the handover. The entry was written in her father's frantic, jagged script. It spoke of a shadow shipment that never arrived at its destination, a cargo of gold and documents that was diverted to a secret vault located beneath the foundation of a building that didn't exist on any official city map. This was the surprise Mei Ling had been waiting for. Her father hadn't disinherited her out of spite. He had disinherited her to keep her away from the explosion that would occur when the secret was finally revealed. "I'm not here for the money, Victor," Mei Ling said, her voice echoing in the hollow hall. "I'm here to finish what I started 20 years ago. I'm here to audit the soul of this family. And if that means the Lee name becomes a footnote in a criminal trial, then so be it. The truth is the only inheritance I'm willing to accept." Outside, the first thunder of a tropical storm rolled across the harbor, and the lights of the mansion flickered. The joy Mei Ling felt was a cold, sharp blade of vindication. The chase of the denied fortune had officially begun, and it would lead her from the heights of the peak to the darkest corners of the Kowloon-walled city's remnants. The resolution of this story was no longer in the hands of the lawyers. It was in the hands of a daughter who had nothing left to lose and everything to reveal. Make sure to stay tuned for the next block of this Hong Kong Chronicle. The hunt for the shadow shipment is about to lead Mei Ling into a confrontation with the ghosts of the past and the predators of the present. Subscribe to Novel Chronicles and leave a comment. Do you think the secrets of the 1997 transition should stay buried, or is it time for the truth to come out? Mei Ling turned and walked toward the study, Victor's protests falling on deaf ears. She knew exactly where the hidden switch was. She knew exactly where the story began, and she knew that by the time the sun rose over the harbor, the Lee family would never be the same again. The sound of thunder over Victoria Harbor was not merely a warning of the impending storm. It was the roar of a city that never sleeps, a place where colonial past and the technological future collide at every corner. Mei Ling entered her father's office, a sanctuary of teak wood and the lingering scent of expensive pipe tobacco. Victor followed her, his aristocratic composure unraveling like old paper. He knew Mei Ling wasn't bluffing. She knew the inner workings of the mansion better than he did, having spent her childhood hiding in its recesses, observing meetings that were never meant to be witnessed. Mei Ling moved toward a bookshelf containing rare editions of 19th century maritime records. With a precise movement, she pulled a specific volume. There was a mechanical click, a sound that seemed to travel across decades, and a section of the wall slid back, revealing a hidden service elevator, a vestige of an era when servants were meant to be invisible. "Father always said that most of Hong Kong's fortune isn't in the glass banks of Central," Mei Ling whispered. "It's in the underground, where the roots of commerce and crime intertwine. If you are fascinated by this descent into the deepest secrets of Hong Kong's dynasties and want to discover what Mei Ling will find in the lower levels of the Lee Mansion, make sure you are subscribed to the Novel Chronicles channel. We are building an epic 100,000 character narrative that will take you to places few dare to look. Activate the bell so you don't miss Block 3, where the truth about the 1997 pact will begin to be revealed. Your subscription is what allows us to continue unearthing these stories of power and betrayal. The elevator descended far below the basement level, stopping in a reinforced tunnel that smelled of saltpeter and ancient dampness. This was the private evacuation tunnel system built during World War II and expanded in the 1950s, when the threat of invasion was a constant reality. Mei Ling switched on a flashlight, the beam cutting through the dense darkness. Victor was behind her, his breath short and nervous. "You have no idea what you're doing, Mei Ling. This place belongs to the past. If you mess with this, you'll attract the attention of people who make the Golden Triangle look like child's play. The problem, Victor, is that the past never died in Hong Kong. It just changed its name," she replied without looking back. They reached a massive steel door, marked with the seal of the Lee Shipping Company. Using the key she had found hidden in the diary, Mei Ling opened the door. What they found inside were not just stacks of cash or gold bars, but something far more valuable in the black market of political influence: the Shadow Archive. There were hundreds of folders containing records of every illegal transaction made between the Tycoon families and the Triad syndicates to ensure that shipping routes remained open during the 1997 sovereignty transition. The joy Mei Ling felt upon seeing those documents was bitter. It was a final proof that her family's fortune had not been built solely on hard work, but on the sale of the city's very soul. The financial topic here was the creation of a parallel economy, a reserve of ghost capital that allowed the Lee family to manipulate property prices and interest rates through shell companies in the British Virgin Islands. This was exclusivity that Victor so desperately wanted to protect. The knowledge that the family's legitimacy was a meticulously constructed facade. The suspense escalated when Mei Ling opened one of the folders marked with the Operation Paper Dragon seal. There lay the 1997 contract. The deal was simple. In exchange for continued protection of their assets, the Lee family agreed to launder the profits of a massive smuggling network operating between Hong Kong and Macau. But there was a betrayal clause. Mei Ling's father had kept evidence against his own Triad partners as an insurance policy. If the family were ever threatened, they could use this archive to destroy the syndicates. But Sir Edward never had the courage to use it. He preferred to disinherit the daughter, who knew too much rather than face the monsters he had shared a bed with. "This is your legacy, Victor," Mei Ling said, pointing to the shelves of secrets. "A fortune built on the denial of justice. You want the money? You can keep it, but I'm taking the truth. I'm handing this archive over to the Independent Commission Against Corruption. Hong Kong deserves to know who truly hold the keys to the city." Victor stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of fear and rage. "You're not leaving here with anything, Mei Ling. You think the Triads don't have eyes and ears in this house? The moment you open that door, you triggered an alarm that isn't silent for them. They are on their way, and they don't negotiate like I do." The link between the colonial sins of 1890 and the modern corruption of 2025 was now about to explode in a physical confrontation. Mei Ling heard the sound of heavy footsteps echoing in the tunnels behind them. They weren't the mansion's security guards. They were the enforcers of the Hyung Syndicate, the heirs of the blood pact Sir Edward had signed. The suspense was electric. The air seemed to vibrate with the urgency of the situation. Mei Ling grabbed the Operation Paper Dragon folder and looked at her brother. "Then we'd better run, Victor, because the truth has a habit of burning those who try to hide it." To find out if Mei Ling and Victor can escape the tunnels before the Triad enforcers catch them and see the bombshell content of Operation Paper Dragon, stay with us at Novel Chronicles. This 100,000 character saga about Hong Kong's denied fortune is just beginning. Subscribe now and leave your like to support this historical investigation. Time is running out for the Lee dynasty. Mei Ling turned off the flashlight. She knew a secondary path through the old ventilation ducts that led directly to the Aberdeen docks. The game had changed. It was no longer about an inheritance. It was about the survival of a truth that Hong Kong had waited nearly 30 years to hear. The cold, stagnant air of the ventilation shafts was a sharp contrast to the tropical heat pressing against the mansion's exterior. Mei Ling moved with calculated silence she had learned during her years of avoiding the spotlight, her fingers gripping the edge of the Shadow Archive folder as if it were a life raft. Behind her, Victor stumbled, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the rusted metal gratings. The sounds of the Hyung Syndicate's men echoing to the main tunnels were growing louder, a rhythmic, predatory thrum of boots that signaled the end of diplomacy. This was the true face of the denied fortune. It wasn't just gold and stock certificates. It was a debt of blood that the Lee family had been servicing for generations. As they crawled through the darkness, Mei Ling's mind flashed back to the truth her father had whispered on his deathbed, a confession he had kept hidden even from his golden son, Victor. The 1997 transition hadn't just been a political handover. It had been a massive logistical operation to move untracked assets out of the British colonial accounts and into the hands of the shadow syndicates. The financial topic here was a ghost cargo, a shipment of imperial bullion, and sensitive intelligence documents that vanished on the night of June 30th, 1997. The world was told the ship had sunk in a typhoon, but the ledger in Mei Ling's hand suggested a much darker reality. The ship had been guided into a secret berth in Aberdeen, and its contents had been used to buy the Lee family's seat at the new table of power. If you are gripped by the tension of the subterranean escape and want to know the exact coordinates of the 1997 Ghost cargo, make sure you're subscribed to Novel Chronicles. We are unfolding a 100,000 character masterpiece that reveals the hidden mechanisms of Hong Kong's elite. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss Block 4, where the secret of the Aberdeen docks will finally be exposed. Your support is what keeps these investigations into the world's most dangerous fortunes alive. They reached a vertical ladder that descended into the old drainage system of the Aberdeen district. The smell of the sea was stronger here, mixed with a metallic tang of industrial waste. Mei Ling kicked open a rusted grate, and they dropped onto a concrete walkway just feet above the rushing black water of the storm drains. "We're close," she whispered, checking a small compass integrated into her watch. "The old shipyard is just 500 meters through this pipe. If we can reach the Sea Dragon vault before the Syndicate seals the perimeter, we can broadcast the contents of this ledger to the global press." "You're insane, Mei Ling," Victor hissed, his face pale under the flickering light of a single emergency bulb. "You're not just destroying the family, you're destroying the city's economy. If the world finds out that the 1997 transition was funded by stolen bullion and Triad gold, the Hong Kong dollar will collapse by morning. You're committing financial treason." The joy Mei Ling felt at his desperation was a cold, sharp blade. For 20 years, she had been the outcast, the one who was unstable and ungrateful. Now, she was the only one who understood the true cost of their luxury. "The economy is already alive, Victor," she replied, her voice echoing off the curved walls of the pipe. "It's a house of cards built on the silence of the dispossessed. I'm not committing treason against Hong Kong. I'm performing an autopsy on a corpse that's been propped up for 30 years. The exclusivity of our wealth is over." The suspense reached a fever pitch as they emerged into a cavernous underground dry dock. In the center of the room sat the Sea Dragon, a vintage 1990s cargo vessel that looked like a ghost ship. It was perfectly preserved, hidden behind a false wall of the city's flood control system. This was the shadow shipment. It hadn't been melted down or sold. It had been kept as a physical insurance policy. If the new government ever moved against the Lee family, Sir Edward was prepared to release the shipment's contents. Documents that detailed the complicity of high-ranking officials in the 1997 smuggling operations. The connection between the colonial debt of 1890 and the corporate corruption today was sitting right in front of them in the form of heavy, wax-sealed crates stacked on the deck of the Sea Dragon. The surprise was that the shipment didn't just contain gold. It contained the original blueprints for the city's most critical infrastructure, blueprints that showed strategic vulnerabilities built into the bridges and tunnels as a fail-safe for the Syndicate. The fortune was a weapon, and Mei Ling was the only one with the courage to pull the trigger. Suddenly, the heavy iron doors at the far end of the dry dock were blown open. A team of men in tactical gear, led by a man with a distinctive dragon tattoo trailing up his neck, swarmed into the room. This was the Hyung Syndicate's elite cleanup crew. They didn't offer a chance to surrender. "The ledger, Miss Lee," the leader said, his voice echoing with a terrifying calm, "or we will ensure that the Sea Dragon becomes your final resting place, just as your father intended for his secrets." Mei Ling looked at the crates, then at the ledger, and finally at the laptop she had brought in her satchel. The urgency of the situation was absolute. She had only seconds to initiate the upload to the decentralized servers she had set up in London. The resolution of her life's work was a single keystroke away. She looked at Victor, who was already raising his hands in a gesture of submission. "Not today, Victor," she whispered, her finger hovering over the enter key. "The truth doesn't need your permission to exist." To see if Mei Ling manages to complete the upload before the Syndicate closes in, and to witness the shocking contents of the Sea Dragon's crates, stay with us for the next block of this epic Hong Kong chronicle. Subscribe to Novel Chronicles and leave a comment. Would you risk your life to expose a billion-dollar lie? The future of the Lee dynasty and the city itself hangs in the balance. As the first bullets whistled through the air, Mei Ling dove behind a stack of crates and pressed a key. A small blue bar on her screen began to crawl forward. 1%, 2%, 5%. The race against the shadows had truly begun. The sea dragon groaned in its cradle, a massive iron beast of the 1990s, refusing to stay silent in the dark. Bullets sparked against the reinforced hull, creating a chaotic rhythm that drowned out the rhythmic drip of the storm drains. Mei Ling lay flat against the cold steel of the deck, the laptop screen casting a pale blue glow over her face. The upload bar was a taunt. 12%, 15%. In the digital world, seconds were an eternity. Below her, on the concrete floor of the dry dock, she could hear the heavy, tactical movements of the Hyung Syndicate. They weren't just here to kill her. They were here to retrieve the physical ledger, the only piece of evidence that couldn't be dismissed as a digital forgery. Victor helped them, the Syndicate leader, a man known in the underworld as the Iron Dragon, shouted, "If that file reaches the server, your name will be the first one on the arrest warrant. You think the mainland will protect the Tycoon who kept a shadow insurance policy against them?" Victor was trembling, caught between the sister he had betrayed and the monsters who had owned his family for a generation. He looked up at the deck where Mei Ling was hidden. The suspense was thick, suffocating like the stagnant air of the shipyard. The financial topic that defined their lives, the accumulation of untracked wealth, was now a literal death trap. Victor realized that the exclusivity of the Lee family's power was a lie. They were merely the prestigious face of a criminal bank that spanned from the triads of Kowloon to the boardrooms of London. If you are gripped by this high-stakes confrontation in the hidden depths of Aberdeen and want to know if Mei Ling's truth can survive the Syndicate's fire, you must be part of our community. Subscribe to Novel Chronicles and hit the bell icon. We are documenting the fall of an empire in this 100,000 character saga. Block 5 will reveal the secret connection between the 1997 gold and the global real estate market. Don't miss the revelation that could change everything you know about international finance. Mei Ling crawled toward the edge of crate, her fingers finding a heavy, wax-sealed canister. This was part of the shadow shipment, the surprise her father had mentioned. She broke the seal, and instead of gold bars, she found something far more dangerous: microfilm canisters from the 1950s. These were the British colonial intelligence files on the Triad families, the ancestors of the men currently shooting at her. The truth was that the Syndicate wasn't just a criminal organization. They were a creation of colonial policy, a tool used by the British to maintain order in the lawless territories. The connection between the 1890 Opium Wars and the 2025 corporate scandals was now a physical object in her hand. The Lee family hadn't just made a deal with the Triads. They were the custodians of the Triads' own history. This was a denied fortune, the leverage that allowed the Lee family to dictate terms to the underworld. If she released this, she wouldn't just be destroying her family. She would be starting a civil war within the Hong Kong underworld. The joy Mei Ling felt was a strange, cold clarity. She wasn't just an estranged daughter anymore. She was the architect of a new Hong Kong. She grabbed a flare gun from the Sea Dragon's emergency kit and looked down at the Iron Dragon. "You think you're protecting your future?" She shouted over the gunfire. "You're protecting a lie that the British told your grandfathers. You're not the masters of the city. You're the janitors of a dead empire." She fired the flare. The blinding crimson light illuminated the entire dry dock, catching the Syndicate men off guard. In that moment of distraction, the upload reached 45%. The urgency of the situation was now a fever pitch. But the Iron Dragon was not so easily deterred. He signaled his men to move in with a specialized thermal charge. They were going to blow the Sea Dragon's hull, sinking the ship and Mei Ling into the deep black waters of the harbor bypass. The resolution of the Lee dynasty was nearing its most violent chapter. Mei Ling looked at the microfilm, then at the laptop. She knew she couldn't stay on the ship. She had to lead them away. She grabbed a ledger and the film, stuffing them into her waterproof satchel. She looked at Victor, who was cowering behind a pillar. "The choice is yours, brother. Stay with the ghosts or swim for the light." As the first explosion rocked the dry dock, sending a plume of water and fire into the air, Mei Ling jumped from the deck of the Sea Dragon. She plunged into the dark, oily water of the storm drain, the weight of the denied fortune pulling at her as she swam toward the secret exit Silas. No, her father had shown her in his drawings. The chase was moving from the mansion to the harbor, and the secrets of 1997 were about to be washed clean by the sea. To see if Mei Ling survives the plunge into the Aberdeen harbor and to witness the global fallout of the first 45% of the data leak, stay tuned in Novel Chronicles. This 100,000 character journey is reaching its boiling point. Subscribe now and leave a comment. Do you think some secrets are too dangerous to ever be told? The truth is out, and it's colder than the deep. Mei Ling emerged from the water near a traditional red-sailed junk boat. She saw a hand reach out to pull her in. It wasn't a marshal, and it wasn't a journalist. It was an old man with a captain's hat and eyes that had seen the 1941 gold firsthand. "The wind is changing, Little Lee," he whispered. "Let's finish the voyage." The deck of the traditional junk boat creaked under the weight of history and salt water. Mei Ling lay gasping for air. The cold harbor, water dripping from her hair onto the weathered wood. The old man, known only as Captain Chun, moved with a surprising fluidity for his age. His eyes scanning the horizon where the neon lights of Aberdeen flickered like dying stars. Behind him, the muffled thump of the secondary explosion at the dry dock echoed across the water. The Sea Dragon was sinking, taking the physical evidence of the syndicate's modern crimes to the bottom of the harbor. But Mei Ling still clutched the satchel. The truth was no longer just digital. It was the ancient microfilm and the 1890 ledger. "You are late, Mei Ling," Chin whispered, steering the junk away from the patrol lights of the Marine Police. "Your father told me in 1997 that if you ever came back to this water, it would be because the wind of change had finally turned into a hurricane. The denied fortune was never meant to be a gift for your brother. It was a ransom for the city's future." The suspense on the water was a silent, suffocating presence. Chun was the last of the water rats, the maritime scouts who had helped the British move the 1941 gold during the Japanese occupation. The financial topic here was the perpetual sovereign debt, a secret agreement where the Lee family acted as custodians of British colonial assets that were never officially handed over to the new administration in 1997. This was the exclusivity that the Hyung Syndicate was dying to protect. The fact that a significant portion of Hong Kong's high-end real estate was still technically collateral for a 19th century opium debt. If you're fascinated by how a secret from the 1940s can destabilize the world's most expensive real estate market today, you must be part of Novel Chronicles. We are halfway through a 100,000 character odyssey into the heart of the Lee Dynasty's darkness. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon to see Block 6, where the junk captain reveals the true location of the 1941 gold cache. The resolution of this mystery is hidden beneath the waves. The gold, it's not in the Sea Dragon, is it? Mei Ling asked, sitting up and checking her laptop. The upload had stalled at 48% when she hit the water. She needed a stable connection, and she needed it before the Syndicate's signal jammers covered the entire harbor. The Sea Dragon was a decoy, a rusted cage for the greedy, Chin said, pointing toward the dark silhouette of Lama Island. The 1941 gold was moved to the Ghost Junk, a vessel that doesn't appear on any radar because it's made of the same wood as the coffins of the ancestors. Your father didn't trust the modern world, Mei Ling. He knew that digital files would be erased and steel ships could be sunk. But the sea remembers everything. The joy Mei Ling felt at this revelation was tempered by a sharp fear. If the gold in the original 1890 treaties were on another vessel, the Iron Dragon would eventually figure it out. The Syndicate had resources that spanned the entire South China Sea. The surprise was that her father had played a double game until his very last breath. He had given the Syndicate the Shadow shipment as a distraction, while keeping the true denied fortune in the hands of the one man the high society tycoons had overlooked, a humble junk captain. The connection between the Opium Wars, the 1941 occupation, and the 1997 handover was a single, bloody thread that led to this moment. Captain Chin began to pull back a tarp at the center of the junk, revealing a sophisticated satellite uplink hidden inside a vintage bamboo crate. Your father paid for this 10 years ago. He said his daughter would need a voice of thunder to wake up the city. Connect your machine. Little Lee. Finish the voyage. Mei Ling's fingers flew across the keyboard. As the connection established, the upload bar jumped to 50%, 55%, 60%. The urgency of the task was now a race against the Syndicate's fast response boats, which he could see approaching from the north. The truth was being beamed to the London Stock Exchange and the International Court of Justice. The names of the 1997 traders were being decoded in real time. "Captain, they're closing in," Mei Ling said, her eyes fixed on the approaching searchlights. "Let them come," Chen replied, a fierce light in his eyes. "They think they own the water because they have engines, but I know the currents. I know where the Devil's Throat opens at low tide. We aren't running Mei Ling. We're leading them to the audit." The resolution of the Hong Kong saga was moving toward a watery grave for the Syndicate's power. As the junk boat entered the narrow, treacherous straits between the islands, the suspense was a physical pressure. Mei Ling watched as the upload reached 75%. The world was beginning to react. In London and New York, the Lee family stocks were being suspended. The shadow economy of Hong Kong was being dragged into the light. To see the final confrontation at the Devil's Throat, and to discover if the 1941 gold is finally used to settle the 1890 debt. Stay with us on Novel Chronicles. This 100,000 character epic is reaching its final, most explosive chapters. Subscribe now and leave a comment. Can the truth ever truly be too late for a city? The junk boat leaned hard into a turn, the red sails catching a sudden violent gust of wind. Mei Ling looked at the screen. 85%. "Almost there, father," she whispered. "Almost there." The red sails of the junk boat snapped like whip cracks in the rising gale, a sound that echoed the violent history of these waters. Captain Chen stood like a statue at the tiller, his weathered skin appearing like carved mahogany under the flickering green light of the satellite uplink. Behind them, the roar of high-performance engines grew louder. The Iron Dragon's fast response boats were cutting through the waves with predatory efficiency. These were the modern hunters, armed with thermal sensors and high-caliber weapons, chasing a ghost from 1890. The suspense was no longer a slow burn. It was an electric charge that made the air smell of ozone and sea salt. "Hold on to the mast, Little Lee," Chen shouted over the howl of the wind. The Devil's Throat is not a place of the faint of heart. It is where the tides of the South China Sea collide with the hidden reefs of the ancestors. Mei Ling gripped the satellite crate as the junk boat plunged into a narrow channel where the water boiled into white foam. On her screen, the upload hit 89%. The financial topic she was broadcasting was now moving into its most devastating phase, the repatriation of the colonial sovereign gold. The documents revealed that the 1941 gold cache was never British property to begin with. It was a forced contribution from the local merchants, held in a secret trust that the Lee family had illegally controlled since 1997. The exclusivity of the Lee fortune was being exposed as a century-long act of grand larceny against the people of Hong Kong. If you are holding your breath as Mei Ling navigates the treacherous waters of both the sea and the global financial markets, you are in the right place. Subscribe to Novel Chronicles and join our 100,000 character exploration of the world's most guarded secrets. Hit the bell icon to see Block 7, where the contents of the ghost junk are finally revealed. The resolution of the 1890 debt is just a wave away. Your support is a shield that protects these hidden truths. The first searchlight from the lead syndicate boat swept over the junk, turning the red sails into a ghostly, translucent crimson. A burst of gunfire chewed into the water just meters away. The urgency of the situation had reached its breaking point. Mei Ling watched the blue bar, 91%, 92%. The data packets containing the signatures of the 1997 Shadow Cabinet were halfway across the world. "They are too close, Captain," Mei Ling cried, the spray from the waves blinding her. "They think they are close," Chen replied with a grim smile. "But they are looking at the surface. They don't know that the Devil's Throat has a false bottom." Suddenly, the junk boat seemed to hit a wall of water. Instead of crashing, it slid into a hidden eddy, a natural conveyor belt created by the unique geography of the reefs. The syndicate boats, moving too fast to adjust, were caught in the primary surge. Mei Ling watched in a mixture of joy and terror as the lead boat was lifted by a massive swell and slammed against the jagged rocks of the channel. The explosion was a brilliant orange bloom against the dark sky, lighting up the surprise that had been waiting in the shadows. The ghost junk itself. There, anchored in a natural sea cave hidden by the spray of the throat, was a second vessel, identical to Chen's but larger, its hull reinforced with ancient iron bands. This was the true location of the 1941 gold. It wasn't just a shipment, it was a floating fortress. The connection between the Li family's denied fortune and this ancient hideout was now undeniable. Mei Ling saw the crates stacked high on the ghost junk's deck, each marked with the seal of the 1890 Merchant Guild. The upload is at 98%. Mei Ling shouted, her voice trembling. The Iron Dragon's second boat managed to clear the eddy, its hull scarred but functional. The leader stood at the bow, his face a mask of fury. He realized he couldn't stop the signal, so he aimed his weapon directly at the satellite uplink. But before he could fire, the resolution of the captain's plan unfolded. Chen pulled a heavy rope attached to the cave ceiling, releasing a massive, ancient silt trap. A deluge of sand and rock buried the syndicate boat in seconds, swamping its engines and sending it spiraling into the depths of the throat. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the waves and the final ping from Mei Ling's laptop. 100%. Upload complete. It's done, Mei Ling whispered, sinking to her knees on the deck. The world knows. The dead is called in. The joy was overwhelming, a tidal wave of relief that washed away 20 years of exile. But as she looked at the ghost junk, she realized the truth was even larger than she imagined. The crates didn't just contain gold. They contained the original land grants for the entire Kowloon Peninsula, documents that the syndicate had claimed were destroyed in the war. The denied fortune was the city itself. To see Mei Ling set foot on the ghost junk and discover the final message her father left for her among the 1941 gold. Stay with us for Block 7. This 100,000 character Hong Kong saga is entering its most revelatory phase. Subscribe now and leave a comment. What would you do if you held the keys to an entire city's land? Captain Chen steered the junk toward the sea cave. The voyage is not over, Mei Ling, he said softly. Now comes the hard part, rebuilding what they broke. The junk boat glided into the mouth of the sea cave, the sound of the raging devil's throat outside fading into a rhythmic, low-frequency thrum. Inside, the air was cool and tasted of salt and ancient dampness. The ghost junk sat there, a massive, silent sentinel of the bygone era. Mei Ling stepped from Chen's boat onto the weathered deck of the larger vessel, her boots making a hollow sound that seemed to travel deep into the hull. The truth was no longer a digital ghost on her screen. It was a physical weight, a century of secrets manifest in wood and iron. Captain Chen remained at the tiller of his boat, watching the cave entrance. You have 30 minutes, Little Lee. The Syndicate's main fleet will be tracking the satellite burst. The signal you sent was a lighthouse. Everyone with a debt or a grudge is coming to this coordinate. The suspense was a physical pressure in Mei Ling's chest. She moved toward the center of the ghost junk, where the crates of the 1941 gold were stacked. But as she approached, she realized the financial topic her father had obsessed over was far more complex than simple bullion. Beside the gold sat a series of climate-controlled, vacuum-sealed glass cases. Inside were not coins, but the truth of the 1890 Merchant Guild, the original hand-inked ledgers of the Opium Reparation Fund. If you are gripped by this discovery of the ultimate leverage over the Hong Kong economy and want to know whose names are written in the 1890 blood ink, you must be part of Novel Chronicles. We are halfway through our 100,000 character exploration of the Li family's greatest sins. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon for Block 8, where we reveal the surprise hidden inside the 1941 gold bars. Your support is the only reason these files are being opened. Mei Ling used a small crowbar to pry open the nearest crate. Instead of the dull glint of gold, she was met with the sight of heavy, lead-lined canisters. She opened one, and her heart skipped a beat. Inside were thousands of high-resolution microfilms and physical exclusivity contracts between the British Colonial Office and the 5 great families of Hong Kong. These documents prove that the 1997 handover was a choreographed illusion. The great families had agreed to surrender the political surface of the city while maintaining a shadow sovereign status over the land and the utilities through a series of 999-year leases that the new administration didn't even know existed. The joy Mei Ling felt was replaced by a staggering sense of responsibility. She wasn't just holding her inheritance. She was holding the denied fortune of 7 million people. The gold was merely the collateral for a much larger game of geopolitical chess. The connection between the 1890 Merchant Guild and the 2025 real estate crisis was right here. Every high-rise apartment and every commercial mall in the city was paying shadow rent to a trust controlled by the Lee family and the Hyung Syndicate. "Father, you didn't hide this to protect the money," she whispered, her voice echoing in the cave. "You hid this because you were the only one who knew the city was still a colony." The urgency of her situation returned as she heard the distant, high-pitched whine of turbine engines. The Syndicate's heavy hitters, the ones Victor was too afraid to even mention, were arriving. These were the antagonists who operated above the law, the enforcers of the 999-year leases. Mei Ling knew she couldn't move the crates. She had to do something more radical. She had to audit the secret in the most public way possible. She pulled out her satellite phone and called the one person she knew would be watching the data leak in London, Elias, the historian from the Chicago Chronicles. "Elias, did you get the 100% upload?" "Mei Ling, the world is exploding." Elias's voice was distorted by the cave's interference. "The London Stock Exchange has halted all trading on Hong Kong-linked assets. But the data has a gap. We need the physical verification of the 1890 treaties to make the repatriation clause stick. Without the original ink, the Syndicate will claim the digital files are deepfake." The surprise was that the digital truth wasn't enough. In a world of AI and manipulation, the ancient paper was the only thing that mattered. Mei Ling looked at the crates and then at the sea dragon flare she had left. She realized the resolution of this saga required her to become a smuggler herself. "I'm bringing the original ink, Elias. Tell the International Court to prepare a docket for the entire city." As she began to load the most critical ledgers onto Captain Chen's junk, the first searchlight from the Syndicate's heavy fleet hit the cave walls. The Devil's Throat was about to become a battlefield. The Lee family's denied fortune was no longer a secret. It was a revolution waiting to be born. To see Mei Ling's desperate escape from the sea cave and the final revelation of the Triad debt legacy in Block 8, stay with us on Novel Chronicles. This 100,000 character epic is rewriting the history of the East. Subscribe now and leave a comment. Should the 999-year leases be honored, or should the land be returned to the people? Mei Ling jumped back onto Chen's boat just as a thermal charge hit the entrance of the cave, sending a shower of stone into the water. "Go, Captain. Show them why the sea doesn't belong to the Tycoons." The sea cave erupted in a symphony of shattering stone and hissing steam as the Syndicate's thermal charges clawed at the entrance. Captain Chen didn't flinch. His hands were locked onto the wooden tiller, guiding the junk boat through a narrow fissure that looked barely wide enough for a person, let alone a vessel. Mei Ling huddled over the 1890 ledgers, protecting the ancient paper with her own body. The suspense was a physical force, a vibration in the air that threatened to shatter her resolve. The financial topic that had remained a whisper for 100 years was now a scream. The Triad debt legacy was a true engine of the city's power, and it was currently trying to bury her alive. As they emerged from the fissure into the open, churning waters of the South China Sea, Mei Ling looked back. The ghost junk was disappearing behind a curtain of smoke and debris, but she had the prize. The exclusivity of the 1890 treaties was now in her satchel. However, the surprise was just beginning. As she opened the first ledger under the flickering light of a flare, she didn't see just numbers. She saw names that matched the modern boardrooms of the very banks currently assisting the government with the transition. The Triads weren't just a muscle. They were the primary shareholders of colonial transition. If you are gripped by this revelation of a century-old criminal banking system and want to know how the Triad debt still dictates the price of gold in the East, you must be part of the Novel Chronicles family. We are moving into the heart of the 100,000 character Hong Kong saga. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon for Block 9, where Mei Ling confronts the Iron Dragon face to face. Your support is the only thing that keeps this truth from being silenced by the tide. Chun, we can't just run. Mei Ling shouted over the roar of the wind. The upload was 100%, but the physical verification is what triggers the repatriation clause. If we don't get these to a neutral consulate, the syndicate will just kill everyone involved and rewrite the digital records. They have the back doors to the servers. The sea provides many paths, literally, but the land is where the judges sit, Chin replied, his eyes fixed on the horizon where a massive black hole destroyer was cutting through the fog. This wasn't the Marine Police. This was the private security fleet of the Hyung Syndicate, a mercenary navy funded by the denied fortune. The connection between the Opium Wars of 1890 and the high-tech mercenaries of 2025 was now a direct line of fire. The joy Mei Ling felt at having the evidence was quickly replaced by an icy fear. She realized that the urgency of her mission was no longer about a leak. It was about an international incident. She reached for the microfilm canisters. One of them was marked with a red wax seal, the symbol of the governor's private secretary, 1997. She cracked it open and held the film up to the flare light. The truth revealed on the film was the final piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just a financial debt. The 1997 Shadow Cabinet had signed away the rights to the city's subsurface mineral wealth, which included the massive untapped lithium and gold deposits discovered beneath the new territories in the 1980s. The Leaf family hadn't just been shipping cargo. They had been the secret owners of the city's very geology. The denied fortune was worth trillions, not billions. They aren't chasing me because of the past, Chun, Mei Ling whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. They're chasing me because I have the title deeds to the future. The 999-year leases were just the cover. This film is the map to the real treasury. The suspense reached a new peak as the Syndicate's destroyer activated its long-range acoustic device, a sonic weapon designed to incapacitate the crew of any small vessel. The air began to vibrate with a high-pitched scream that felt like needles in Mei Ling's brain. She collapsed onto the deck, clutching the satchel. The resolution of her struggle seemed impossible. How could a wooden junk boat survive a modern naval assault? But Captain Chin began to laugh, a deep, ancient sound that defied the sonic pressure. He pulled a lever at the base of the mast, and the junk's red sails were suddenly replaced by a high-tech, radar-absorbent fabric. Your father didn't just spend his money on gold, Mei Ling. He spent it on the silent voyage. We aren't a target anymore. We are a hole in their radar. The junk boat seemed to vanish from the Syndicate's sensors, the sonic weapon suddenly losing its lock. The surprise was that the old man was a master of asymmetrical warfare. The connection between the water rats of the 1940s and the stealth technology of today was the ultimate exclusivity of the Leaf family's defense. To see Mei Ling's stealthy approach to the neutral waters of the international consulate and to witness the moment the Triad debt is finally called in, stay with us on Novel Chronicles. This 100,000 character epic is unfolding in ways that no history book would dare to record. Subscribe now and leave a comment. If you discovered your city sat on $1 trillion secret, who would you tell first? Mei Ling looked at the microfilm one last time before tucking it into her inner pocket. The audit isn't just for the Lee family, Chin, she said, her voice regaining its strength. It's for the whole world. The junk boat, now a ghost on the Syndicate's radar, glided to the pitch-black waters like a serrated blade through silk. The high-tech, radar-absorbent sails absorbed the ambient light, making the vessel nearly invisible against the backdrop of the churning sea. Mei Ling sat in the center of the deck, her body still vibrating from the acoustic assault. But her mind was sharper than ever. She opened the 1890 ledger to a specific page, the blood seal of the Kowloon Guild. It was more than a financial record. It was a genealogical map of corruption. It showed that the Iron Dragon was not just a title for a triad leader, but a hereditary role passed down within a family that had been Lee Dynasty's silent partners for over a century. The suspense shifted from the physical chase to a psychological confrontation. Mei Ling knew that the man chasing her was likely someone she had known in her childhood. someone who had probably sat at her father's dinner table while the shadow cabinet planned the 1997 transition. The financial topic here was the inherited liability, the fact that the triad debt wasn't just about money, but about the control of the city's labor unions and port authorities. The exclusivity of the Leaf fortune was a shared secret, a codependency between the high society elite and the subterranean muscle. If you are gripped by this revelation of the symbiotic relationship between legitimate tycoons and the criminal underworld, make sure you are subscribed to Novel Chronicles. We are diving deep into a 100,000 character odyssey that exposes the structural rot of global power. Hit the notification bell for Block 10, where Mei Ling finally encounters the man behind the mask. The resolution of the century-old blood pact is reaching its boiling point. Your support is the only way we can continue to bring these dark chronicles to light. They won't stop at the border, Chun, Mei Ling whispered, staring at a diagram in the ledger that outlined the underground flow of the denied fortune. It looked like a circulatory system, with the Aberdeen docks acting as the heart. The 1890 treaties have a clause I didn't see before. The Iron Dragon has the right to audit the Leaf family if the shadow payments ever stop. My father didn't disinherit me to protect me. He did it to keep me from becoming the collateral for the next payment. The joy she felt at her escape was now eclipsed by a chilling realization. She was a target because she was the only unclaimed asset left. The connection between the 1941 gold and her own life was a debt that hadn't been settled. The surprise was that the denied fortune wasn't just hidden wealth. It was a bribe to keep the Iron Dragon from claiming the Leaf family's actual bloodline as part of the Triad's hierarchy. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the low, rhythmic hum of a drone. Not a surveillance drone, but a delivery unit. It hovered over the junk boat for a second before dropping a small, weighted cylinder onto the deck. Mei Ling picked it up. Inside was a high-frequency transmitter and a handwritten note in traditional calligraphy. The 1890 ink belongs to the guild. The daughter belongs to the dragon. Meet me at the gateway of the dead, or the city burns. The urgency of the situation was no longer about a court case. It was a hostage situation where the entire city of Hong Kong was a captive. The Iron Dragon was threatening to activate the strategic vulnerabilities mentioned in the 1997 blueprints. Fail-safes built into the power grid and water supply that could shut down the city in minutes. The resolution of the Lee legacy was now a choice between Mei Ling's survival and the city's stability. "Captain, he's at the gateway of the dead," Mei Ling said, her voice trembling. The old entrance to the walled city. Captain Chen's face darkened. That place was supposed to be demolished in 1993. If the Iron Dragon is there, it means the shadow walled city still exists beneath the concrete. It's the one place the police can't go, even today. It's the heart of the 1890 debt. The connection between the demolished past and the hidden present was the ultimate exclusivity of the syndicate. They hadn't just built skyscrapers. They had built a second city beneath them. Mei Ling knew she had to go. She had the 1890 ledger, the 1941 microfilm, and the 1997 shadow cabinet signatures. She was the audit. To see Mei Ling descend into the hidden ruins of the Kowloon walled city for the final confrontation with the Iron Dragon. Stay with us on Novel Chronicles. This 100,000 character epic is revealing the terrifying price of Hong Kong's prosperity. Subscribe now and leave a comment. Would you trade your family secrets to save an entire city from darkness? Mei Ling looked at Captain Chun. "Take me to the gateway. It's time to settle the account once and for all." The entrance to the gateway of the dead was not a gate at all, but rusted maintenance hatched hidden behind a row of dilapidated seafood stalls in the shadow of the Kai Tak development. As Mei Ling stepped off Captain Chen's junk boat and onto the rain-slick concrete, the smell of the harbor was replaced by something older, the scent of wet earth, copper, and a century of stagnant air. The suspense was a physical weight, pressing against her chest as she clutched the satchel containing the 1890 treaties. This was the threshold where the financial topic of her father's life met the literal underworld. Behind the hatch lay a staircase that descended into a subterranean labyrinth. This was the shadow-walled city, a network of illicit corridors and makeshift apartments built beneath the foundations of the demolished Kowloon walled city. The exclusivity of this location was absolute. It was a place that did not exist on any map, powered by illegal taps into the city's main grid, and governed by the ancient codes of the Kowloon Guild. As Mei Ling descended, she saw the flickering blue light of illegal servers and the rhythmic glow of hydroponic farms. The denied fortune hadn't just been hidden, it had been invested in a parallel civilization. If you are stunned by the idea of a secret city operating beneath one of the world's most modern metropolises, you are not alone. Subscribe to Novel Chronicles as we enter the most dangerous phase of our 100,000 character investigation. Hit the notification bell for Block 11, where the Iron Dragon finally reveals his face and the true purpose of the 1890 Blood Seal. Your support allows us to keep digging into the shadows of history. Mei Ling reached the bottom of the stairs, where the air was thick with the sound of thousands of whispered conversations and the constant hum of cooling fans. In the center of a cavernous room that had once been a British bunker, sat a man at a table carved from a single piece of black obsidian. He didn't wear the traditional robes of a triad boss. He wore a bespoke Italian suit, his hair slicked back with military precision. This was the Iron Dragon. And as he turned to face her, Mei Ling felt a surge of cold joy mixed with absolute horror. "Uncle Zhang," she whispered, her voice breaking. The man smiled, but his eyes remained as cold as the sea. Zhang had been her father's closest advisor, the man who had taught her how to play chess when she was 6 years old. He was an antagonist she had never suspected, the bridge between the Li family's legitimate empire and the Guild's shadow assets. "Mei Ling, you always had a talent for finding things that were meant to stay lost," Zhang said, gesturing for her to sit. "Your father thought he could win the game by hiding you in London, but he forgot that in Hong Kong, the truth is always a shared commodity. The 1890 debt isn't just a number, my dear. It's a pact of survival. The Li family provides the face, and the Guild provides the foundation. Without us, your father would have been just another refugee in 1949. The surprise was that the betrayal was systemic. The connection between her father's success and Zhang's power was a single, unbreakable bond of mutual blackmail. Zhang reached for the satchel. "The 1890 ledger, please. And the microfilm. We need to settle the interest on the 1997 transition. The city is waiting for the urgently of its next phase." "What phase?" Mei Ling asked, her hand tightening on the strap of her bag. "The total integration of the Shadow City into the main economy," Zhang replied, his voice filled with a terrifying ambition. "With the documents you have, we can prove that the Guild owns the subsurface rights to half the island. We won't be living in the dark anymore, Mei Ling. We will be the landlords of the new era. The resolution of the 1890 Pact is not a secret anymore. It's a revolution." The connection between the colonial land grants and the modern energy crisis was the ultimate financial topic. If Zhang could prove the Guild's ownership of the lithium deposits through the 1890 treaties, he would control the future of the entire region's green energy transition. The denied fortune was no longer about gold. It was about the power to dictate the terms of the 21st century. Mei Ling looked around the room. She saw the Iron Dragon enforcers, men with modern tactical gear, standing next to traditional triad shrines. She realized that she wasn't just in a meeting. She was in the heart of a machine that had been building itself for over 100 years. The suspense was electric. If she gave him the documents, she saved the city from the strategic vulnerabilities, but enslaved it to Zhang's guild. If she refused, the Shadow City might pull the city above into the dark. To see Mei Ling's final choice in the resolution of the confrontation in the shadow-walled city, stay tuned for Block 11. This 100,000 character epic is reaching its final, most world-shaking revelations. Subscribe now and leave a comment. Who is the real villain? The man who kept the secret, or the man who wants to use it to rule? Mei Ling slowly opened the satchel, but she didn't pull out the ledger. She pulled out a small, high-frequency jammer she had taken from Captain Chen's boat. The upload was only the first part. "Uncle Zhang," she said, her voice regaining its strength. "The second part is the audit. And in an audit, everyone has to show their hands." The hum of the high-frequency jammer in Mei Ling's hand created a localized field of static, a microscopic barrier between her and the Iron Dragon. Uncle Zhang's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed, calculating the risk of her defiance. Around them, The shadow-walled city seemed to pulse with invisible energy, the blue lights of the server racks flickering as her jammer interfered with the localized network. The suspense was a thin wire, stretched to the point of snapping. The financial topic had shifted from billions of dollars to the absolute control of a city's destiny. An audit, Mei-Ling? Zhang asked, leaning back into his obsidian throne. You forget that in this city, the auditors are the ones who get buried in the foundation of the new skyscrapers. You have the 1890 treaties. Yes, you have the 1941 microfilm. But you are standing in a city that hasn't existed on a map for 30 years. There are no courts here, no international press, only the dragon. Mei-Ling felt estranged. Cold joy. She realized that Zhang's exclusivity was also his weakness. By operating so far outside the law, he was vulnerable to the very truth he had spent a century hiding. The connection between her father's silence and Zhang's ambition was the blood seal of the Kowloon Guild, a document that Mei-Ling now realized was not a contract, but a confession. If you are gripped by this descent into the heart of Hong Kong's hidden power structure and want to know what exactly is written in the Audit of Souls, you must be part of Novel Chronicles. We are nearing the final phase of this 100,000 character masterpiece. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell for Block 12, where surprise in the 1890 ledger changes the legal status of the entire island. Your engagement is the only light we have in these tunnels. Mei-Ling reached into the satchel and pulled out the 1890 ledger, but she didn't hand it to him. Instead, she opened it to a hidden fold-out map at the back, a map she had only discovered while on Captain Chen's junk. It wasn't a map of land. It was a map of the city's subsurface architecture, showing the strategic vulnerabilities not as weapons to the Syndicate, but as the primary evidence of their illegal occupation of public infrastructure. The audit is already live, Zhang, Mei-Ling said, her voice echoing through the bunker. The 100% upload didn't just go to the press. It went to the international insurance conglomerates that underwrite every building in Hong Kong. The moment they saw that the foundations of their insured assets were compromised by the Guild's Shadow City, they triggered the force majeure clauses. The financial topic isn't about your ownership anymore. It's about the fact that your entire empire just became uninsurable. You are a liability, not a landlord. The suspense in the room was absolute. Zhang's enforcers looked at each other, their tactical gear suddenly feeling like a funeral shroud. In the world of high finance, if you cannot insure your asset, you do not own it. Mei-Ling had used the Syndicate's own greed against them. The urgency of the situation was now Zhang's problem. If he didn't settle the 1890 debt and surrender the Shadow City, the global markets would strip him of his legitimate assets within the hour. You would burn the house down just to see me leave? Zhang hissed, the composure finally cracking. I'm not burning it down, Uncle Zhang. I'm just letting the light in, Mei-Ling replied. The surprise, my father's wasn't the gold. It was the repatriation clause. He knew that the only way to save the Lee legacy was to return the denied fortune to the public. The 999-year leases are being declared void as we speak, based on the colonial fraud evidence in this ledger. The resolution of the Lee family's sins was unfolding in the digital ether above them. The connection between the 19th century opium trade and the 21st century property market was being severed by a daughter who had nothing left to fear. The truth was that the denied fortune was the only thing that could pay for the city's transition into a truly independent future. Suddenly, a series of muffled explosions rocked the ceiling of the bunker. Not the Syndicate's charges, but the sound of heavy drilling from the surface. The audit was arriving in person. The Special Duties Unit of the Hong Kong Police, backed by international observers, had finally located the Gateway of the Dead through the signal Mei-Ling's jammer was broadcasting. The Iron Dragon stood up, his hand reaching for a concealed weapon. You think you've won, Mei-Ling? You've just opened a void. Without the Guild, the city has no foundation. Then we'll build a new one, Mei-Ling said, stepping back into the shadows as the first flashbangs detonated at the top of the stairs. To see the final confrontation between Mei-Ling and Zhang in the smoke and fire of the shadow-walled city, stay with us for Block 12. This 100,000 character epic is rewriting the history of the East. Subscribe now and leave a comment. Is a city better off with a dark truth or a bright, unstable freedom? Mei Ling clutched the 1890 ledger to her chest as the world turned into a blur of white light and thunder. The debt was being called in, and the price was everything. The shadow-walled city transformed into a chaotic theater of white noise and blinding light. Flashbangs from the Special Duties Unit, SDU, tore through the stagnant air, shattering the exclusivity of Zhang's subterranean kingdom. Mei Ling dug behind a heavy server rack, her ears ringing, but her eyes never left the Iron Dragon. Zhang moved with a desperate, animalistic speed, lunging not for her, but for the obsidian table where the master terminal sat. He was trying to trigger the strategic vulnerabilities, the final scorched earth protocol that would plunge the city above into a catastrophic blackout. The suspense was no longer about a secret. It was about the literal lifeblood of 7 million people. The connection between the 1890 blood seal and the 2025 power grid was a series of hidden bypasses built into the very bedrock of Hong Kong. If Zhang succeeded, the denied fortune would be used as a ransom for the city's survival. The financial topic had reached its most terrifying conclusion, a total economic blackout that would destroy the Hong Kong Stock Exchange in minutes. If you are witnessing this final struggle for the heart of the East and want to know if Mei Ling can prevent the blackout protocol from destroying the city, you must stay with Novel Chronicles. We are in the final 30,000 characters of our 100,000 character Hong Kong investigation. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon for Block 13, where the true identity of the 1997 Shadow Cabinet is finally revealed. Your support is the only thing standing between the truth and total darkness. It's too late, Zhang. Mei Ling screamed over the sound of drilling and gunfire. The insurance carriers have already notified the grid operators. They've switched to the backup colonial trunk, the one the guild doesn't control. Zhang froze, his hand inches from the terminal. The joy Mei Ling felt at seeing his hesitation was the first moment of true victory. The audit was not just a legal threat. It was a physical redirection of power. By identifying the intersection between the private guild tunnels and the public grid, Mei Ling had provided the city with a map to bypass their own captors. You think you won because you have a map? Zhang hissed, turning toward her with a silenced pistol. A map is just paper. In these tunnels, only the dragon knows the way out. You brought the police into a maze they can't navigate. You just signed their death warrants. Suddenly, the SDU team breached the main hall, their tactical lights cutting through the blue haze. But they didn't fire. They stood in a defensive perimeter, led by a man Mei Ling recognized from the consulate, a high-ranking international observer. The urgency of the situation had moved into a diplomatic stalemate. Director Zhang, the observer said, his voice amplified through a megaphone. The 1890 treaties have been verified by the archive in London. Your claim to the subsurface rights has been voided under the colonial fraud statute. Surrender the terminal and the blackmail tapes, or the SDU has orders to treat this as an act of international terrorism. The surprise was that the world was no longer willing to play the syndicate's game. The exclusivity of the 1997 handover agreements was being rewritten on the fly to prevent a global financial meltdown. The resolution of the Li legacy was becoming a global precedent for how to handle the ghost fortunes of the colonial era. Zhang looked at the soldiers, then at Mei Ling. He realized that the denied fortune was no longer his leverage. It was his cage. The connection between his family's service to the crown and his betrayal of the city had been exposed by a woman who refused to be a piece in his game. The tapes aren't here, Zhang said, a dark smile returning to his face. They were never here. Your father didn't trust me, and I didn't trust him. The tapes are on the Sea Dragon, sinking to the bottom of the harbor. Mei Ling felt a cold dread. If the tapes were lost, the identities of the Shadow Cabinet, the men currently holding high office, would remain a secret. The truth would be incomplete. But then she remembered the 1941 microfilm in her pocket. The tapes are on the ship, Zhang. But the original ledger of the debt is in my hand, Mei Ling said, stepping into the light. And it has your signature from 1997. It doesn't matter who else was in the cabinet. We have the head of the dragon. to see if Zhang pulls the trigger or if the SDU manages to take the Iron Dragon alive, and to witness the final Audit of the Soul in Block 13, stay with us on Novel Chronicles. The 100,000 character epic is reaching its shattering climax. Subscribe now and leave a comment. Can a city truly be free if its foundations are still built on criminal secrets? As Zhang raised his weapon, the ground beneath the shadow-walled city began to shake, not from explosion, but from the weight of the city above reclaiming its ground. The audit had begun. The tremor that shook the shadow-walled city was the sound of an era collapsing. Dust and silt rained from the cracked concrete ceiling as the SDU team moved in, their boots crunching on the glass of shattered server racks. Zhang stood frozen, the silenced pistol in his hand, trembling not with fear, but with the sudden realization that his exclusivity had been a hollow shell. The international observer stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the obsidian table. The game is over, Zhang. The Shadow Cabinet is currently being detained in 3 different time zones. Your father's denied fortune just became the world's largest asset seizure. The suspense was suffocating as Zhang looked at Mei Ling, his face a mask of bitter defeat. The financial topic had reached its endgame, the total liquidation of the Li Hyung alliance. The connection between the 1997 Secret Pact and the modern-day property bubble was being dismantled in front of their eyes. But Mei Ling knew there was one final surprise hidden within the 1890 ledger, a secret that even Zhang hadn't fully decoded. If you are witnessing the final, world-shaking moments of this 100,000-character Hong Kong saga, you are part of history. Subscribe to Novel Chronicles and hit the bell icon. We are about to enter the final block, where the truth about the Li family's true origin and the ultimate fate of the 1941 gold will be revealed. Your support has brought us to the edge of the abyss. Now, let's see what's at the bottom. Wait! Mei Ling shouted, her voice cutting through the tactical commands of the SDU. She opened the 1890 ledger to the very last page, where a series of intricate hand-drawn seals were layered over a map of the harbor. She realized that the denied fortune was not just gold or land. It was a literal subterranean network that connected the city's various colonial vaults into a single, massive pressure valve system. Zhang, look at the pressure gauges on the terminal. Mei Ling pointed at the flickering screens. The Shadow City wasn't just a hideout. It was built into the city's flood defense system. By drilling into this bunker, the SDU has accidentally compromised the primary seals. If we don't reset the 1890 counterweights, the entire Aberdeen district will be flooded by the tide within the hour. The urgency of the situation shifted from a criminal arrest to a civilian catastrophe. The denied fortune had been used as a weight to keep the sea at bay for over 100 years. The Li family hadn't just been hiding money. They had been the unofficial engineers of the city's safety. The connection between the 1890 Merchant Guild and the modern-day drainage infrastructure was the ultimate exclusivity of their power. They didn't just own the land. They held back the ocean. The joy Mei Ling felt at her victory vanished, replaced by the terrifying responsibility of her inheritance. She realized that her father's was not a gift of wealth, but a manual for survival. Zhang, only the blood seal can reset the weights. The manual override is beneath your table. Zhang looked at the terminal, then at the rising water level in the lower sumps. For a moment, the antagonist seemed to revert to the uncle she once knew. He saw the city above, the neon lights, the millions of lives, and he saw the vanity of his own ambition. With a grunt of effort, he pushed the obsidian table aside, revealing an ancient bronze wheel marked with 1890 guild symbols. The resolution of the debt is to keep the city dry, Zhang muttered, his voice devoid of its earlier arrogance. Together, Mei Ling and Zhang gripped the cold bronze wheel. The suspense was electric as they turned it against the pressure of the South China Sea. The connection between the colonial past and the modern present was forged one last time in a desperate act of cooperation. With a thunderous groan of shifting stone and rushing air, the ancient counterweight settled. The flood was averted. But as the SDU team moved in to handcuff Zhang, he looked at Mei Ling and whispered, "The 1890 ink is dry, Mei Ling. But the sea never stops calling in its debts. Your father knew that. Now you know it too." The resolution of the Hong Kong Chronicles was almost complete. Mei Ling watched as the Iron Dragon was led away, his Italian suit ruined, his legacy a pile of digital ash. She stood alone in the heart of the Shadow City, clutching the 1890 ledger. The truth was out, the denied fortune was public, and the Shadow Cabinet was no more. But as she looked up to the drill hole at the skyscrapers of Central, she realized that the city was now truly hers, not as a tycoon, but as its keeper. To see the final, breathtaking conclusion of this 100,000-character odyssey and find out what Mei Ling does with the remaining 1941 gold in Block 14, stay with us on Novel Chronicles. This is the moment where the legend meets the reality. Subscribe now and leave a comment. Is the truth worth the cost of the foundation? Mei Ling walked toward the stairs, the weight of the ledger finally feeling like a badge of honor. The denied fortune was gone, but the city was still standing. The shadow-walled city was now a tomb of secrets illuminated by the harsh, clinical lights of forensic teams and international investigators. Mei Ling ascended the rusted staircase for the last time, each step taking her further away from the damp, heavy silence of the underworld and closer to the vibrant, chaotic morning of the surface. In her hand, the 1890 ledger felt lighter, as if the burden of its secrets had been transferred to the global news feeds. The suspense that had fueled her 20-year exile had finally dissolved into clarity of justice. The financial topic that once threatened to sink the city was now the catalyst for its rebirth. As she emerged from the maintenance hatch into Kai Tak district, the sun was rising over Victoria Harbor, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. A crowd had gathered, journalists, curious onlookers, and those who lost everything in the 1997 property scams. Mei Ling didn't look for the cameras. She looked for the junk boat. There, anchored near the pier, was Captain Chen's vessel, the red sails furled and peaceful. The exclusivity of her father's power was gone, replaced by the truth that belonged to every citizen who breathed the salty Hong Kong air. The joy Mei Ling felt was quiet and profound. The denied fortune, the billions in untracked bullion, the shadow land grants, and the 1941 gold was no longer her family's shame. Under the repatriation clause verified in the 1890 ledger, the assets were being moved into the People's Heritage Trust, a fund dedicated to housing and public infrastructure. The connection between the colonial exploitation of 1890 and the future of 2026 was finally a positive one. The Li dynasty had ended, but the Li legacy of service was being restored in a way Sir Edward could never have imagined. Thank you for staying with us through this epic 100,000-character chronicle of the Hong Kong denied fortune. You have witnessed the fall of the Iron Dragon and the rise of a daughter who chose the truth over a throne. You are the heart of the Novel Chronicles community. If you haven't already, subscribe now and join us as we prepare to uncover our next global mystery. Your support and your comments are what keep these investigations alive. Make sure to hit the bell icon so you're the first to see our next journey into the shadows. In a final meeting at the International Consulate, Mei Ling handed over the last pieces of the puzzle: the 1941 microfilm and the 1997 Shadow Cabinet recordings. The surprise for the international community was the sheer scale of the corruption, but the resolution was a global standard for financial transparency. Victor, her brother, had signed a full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence, finally admitting that he had been a puppet of the syndicate. The urgency of the transition was over. The audit of souls was complete. Mei Ling walked down to the pier where Captain Chen was waiting. He looked at her and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the war they had won. "What will you do now, little Li?" he asked, his voice carrying the wisdom of the tides. "You could lead the trust. You could be the most powerful woman in the East." Mei Ling looked out the horizon, where a modern cargo ship was passing a traditional junk. "I've spent my whole life fighting over a fortune I never wanted. Chun, I think I'll just go for a sail." As the junk boat pulled away from the pier, the Hong Kong Chronicles reached their final, serene note. The city was still there, vertical, crowded, and loud. But beneath its foundations, the shadow-walled city was being filled with concrete, and its ghosts were finally being laid to rest. The 1890 debt was settled. The 1941 gold was home, and the daughter of the Tycoon was finally free. This is the end of the Hong Kong saga, but the world is a vast library of hidden ledgers. Join us next time as we follow a new trail of blood and gold. This is Novel Chronicles. The truth has been told.